I find even in the mediation setting where people may feel that they're not able to have the relationship they want or parent the kids the way they want, it's because they haven't been afforded a platform to really speak authentically with the other parent, which never happens in court. But in mediation, it does. So in mediation, I'm sure you do the same thing. You give people the space to be heard. And then hopefully from that, people begin to respect each other and trust each other. And those so-called issues of parent alienation sometimes evaporate.
Hi, I'm Rachel Green, Brooklyn-based divorce mediator and collaborative attorney, and this is my podcast, Keep the Kids in Mind. Join me as I chat with other industry professionals about everything from smoothly navigating your way through divorce to prenups, all the while keeping the kids in mind. Good morning. Welcome to Keep the Kids in Mind. I'm just thrilled that Helene Bernstein is able to join us this morning. Hi, Helene.
Hi, Rachel. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Helene is an attorney, mediator, collaborative attorney. She has also worked as an attorney for the children, and she's very experienced in all aspects of family and matrimonial law. And Helene, I guess you can fill in the blanks on what I left out of your illustrious history and experience.
Sure. I've actually been practicing law for 35 years. It's hard to believe.
You started when you were in middle school.
Of course, I was a genius child. But, my career has always been focused on children. And I was a prosecutor for the Administration for Children's Services, which in some jurisdictions is called Child Protective Services. Oh. And I started in the late 80s when the crack epidemic was at its height. And so I became very comfortable in the courtroom. And of course, the well-being of children was what we were all about. And eventually I moved over to the other side of the council table and represented adults and children in other matters besides child protective matters. I did a lot of work in the custody field and family court, where there are couples who are many times unmarried, or couples who have issues post-divorce. Yeah. We also did that type of work in Supreme Court, where in New York we handle divorces.
So how did you find your way to becoming a mediator?
It's an excellent question. I like telling this story. I was about 15 years ago. I was in the middle of some very high conflict custody matters within divorce. And I represented the children. In those days, the judges really leaned on the attorneys to try to resolve the cases, as opposed to today, where you're more of an advocate and you don't have that role. So just being very frustrated, I saw there was a continuing ed program at the city bar. I believe Dan White's was moderating that program, and it was basically a program about what is mediation and is it for you. And I sat there, and like many of our colleagues, the light bulb went off, and I said, this is the missing link. I need to help people to try to resolve their matters outside of court.
Yeah, so it really just made sense to you that they have enough in common, that they're aligned enough that it's worth it for them to sit down together and say, look, we agree on this, we're both focused on the well-being of our children, instead of like turning it into a battle that goes on for 3 or 5 years. Let's just,
if you're lucky, it could go on for 8 or 10 years. And I think what people, once they're mired in that court process, they realize that's what they do have in common, that they need to get out of this very difficult process. And hard to move away. But luckily, the court system does have a mediation program now. So even if you do get in the process willingly or unwillingly, there might be a way out.
Mhm.
asking the judge for a referral to their mediation program, which I'm a member of their panel. And it could be very productive for people if they want to be able to create their own destinies.
Yeah. So, what personally drew you to this work? Like, did you go to law school hoping to help children and families, or did you just find your way to this?
I'm probably one of those few people that always knew that I wanted to do family law and help children and families. And I actually did take a mediation course at Brooklyn Law School, which was pretty unusual. I think Gary Friedman was actually the instructor.
Oh, wow.
And so I always had on the back of my mind that that's something I wanted to do. I was a camp counselor. I worked in the children's section of the library. My mom was a paraprofessional. So helping kids was always in my blood.
Yeah.
And of course, I was fortunate to be the mother of two great kids. So I love kids, and especially when you're in the court process and representing children, it really helps them uh, calm down when they know there's somebody by their side. And you
Yeah.
can really get
So,
to know some of these kids.
yeah. So, what are some things that you've seen families and parents do that worked well, and what and or not so well?
In mediation or in the court process or both?
Yeah, any and all.
Well, of course, the most important thing, which is hard to do, is keep the children out of the conflict, which means that you have to be very supportive of a parent when they come pick up their kids, for instance, for parenting time, even though in the back of your mind you're pissed as hell that your spouse or co-parent hasn't given you the monthly child support. You can't get the kids involved with that because kids' self-esteem and well-being, it's been well documented, is improved when they know both parents are supporting them and make them feel like they're very lucky to have both parents behind them.
Yeah. Sorry, that's my dog.
Well, that's okay.
So, when you say keep the children out of the middle, do you mean don't like the parents shouldn't talk to the children? I mean, like that's one thing I know. The parents shouldn't say, "Your father still owes me the," or "Your mother is just whatever." They shouldn't complain to the child about the other parent. But what are other
Exactly.
ways that parents do the wrong thing?
Well, some parents, after maybe the kids come home from parenting time with the other parent, they start cross-examining the kid.
Oh.
Where did you go? Who did you see?
Mhm.
And it puts a lot of pressure on the kids. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes what happens is the parent or the former spouse, they might be dating somebody and they introduce the kids. And even though the parents may have had an agreement to have had a private conversation about that eventuality, it doesn't happen sometimes. And the kids just, again, get in the middle of it. So that is a common thing where kids feel a lot of pressure to report back
Mhm.
on
So
an
I remember attending a seminar by a child development specialist, and they said that the kids know that the parents are, separated, divorcing, having conflict. So like there could be, like the example they gave is the dad took the son to an amusement park and they had a fantastic time. Like they rode the roller coaster 6 times and the kid was, thrilled. And then, he goes to the dad drops the kid off at mom's and mom says, "How was your weekend?" And he goes, "That was fine." He doesn't feel like he can say, "Oh, mom, we rode the roller coaster," because he feels like the mother is going to be jealous that
Yeah,
he had fun with the dad. So somehow the kid felt guilty for loving both parents. Like I just remember that example because it's like heartbreaking. Like kids should be allowed to love both their parents. Like they still love the parents, even if the parents don't love each other.
Yeah. So sometimes I have found that I think there is some data on this point. Kids will align themselves with the parent that they feel is more vulnerable,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
need to protect them. And then, it's not great for them, obviously. And it really skews the relationship where the parent who appears to be stronger is feeling frustrated because they can't connect in the way they want to.
Yeah.
That's an
Well, I guess
interesting
that's
one.
like, right. That's the dynamic that in its extreme leads to what they call parental alienation.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've seen quite a
Where,
lot.
right. Where there's like one parent who's so fragile that they really are threatened by the children having a good relationship with the other parent, and they need that child to like disown their other parent. Those
Absolutely.
cases are really painful.
Yes, I've been in the middle of many of them.
You have? Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yes, and the word parent alienation is such a charged term because
Oh,
it means different things to different people, and what is for sure that it does trigger people in a very negative way. And at least through mediation, we try to get peel all the layers behind what that actually even means. Yes, parent alienation is something that we all have to deal with, whether we're representing adults or children in court or whether we're a neutral mediator. It's
yeah. Well, I
something
mean, I
about.
have not really, I mean, I guess I've had some experience with it, but, not really much, because I do find that the overwhelming majority of people who are choosing mediation are motivated by wanting to protect their children from the conflict and try to find a way to work together. Like they're not, I would say the majority of the people who come to me are not having conflicts about the children, knock wood.
Well,
But
very lucky, Rachel.
yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, they're having conflicts about other things. Maybe they have some conflicts around communication, but they're not, they're aligned as far as like, I often hear them say like, well, I know you're a great dad. I know the children need you. You're a wonderful mom. Of course the children need you, and they're not arguing about that. So
Yeah, I find even in the mediation setting where people may feel that they're not able to have the relationship they want or parent the kids the way they want, it's because they haven't been afforded a platform to really speak authentically with the other parent, which
mm,
never happens in court. But in
yeah,
mediation, it does. So in mediation, I'm sure you do the same thing. You give people the space to be heard. And then hopefully from that, people begin to respect each other and trust each other. And those so-called issues of parent alienation sometimes evaporate.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's amazing when that happens. That must be so satisfying for you too, as a professional.
Absolutely. It's like if we can get them signed on for mediation, then I feel like they're halfway there.
Yeah, I think that's true, because they're at least, in a forum where they have time. Like, people imagine that the judge is going to be the father, the wise father who, they never really had, who's going to like look at them and say, "Oh, you poor thing, what you've put up with all these years with that person." And and instead, I guess I haven't been a litigator as you have, but my understanding is that judges don't even want to hear from the parties. They want to hear from the attorneys. They want to figure out, what's this case from a legal perspective, and move forward. They don't want to hear about, how your spouse was always late coming home and never made dinner, and you know,
Absolutely.
right.
We're sitting here in Brooklyn, New York, and some people don't know that Brooklyn Family Court, where many of these contested custody cases are heard, is the biggest family court in the United States.
Oh, wow.
And many of the litigants do not even see the judge to weigh into the case.
Yeah.
And they assign the case to a court attorney that's an attorney who basically helps manage their calendar. And it could be a year or two before you'll even schedule a trial. And
Yeah.
so
Wow.
we talk about not feeling heard or respected.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, people don't live those types of lives where they can keep these important issues on hold. They need
Right.
it managed now. And
Yeah.
so many people walk into court because they haven't been advised properly or they're just so angry. And I'm here to say that even if you do walk into court, you can still resolve your case in your situation through mediation.
Yeah.
It's never too late.
Right. I think I read somewhere, but this was several years ago, that every family court judge had something like 5,500 cases a year.
It could be.
Yeah.
It
So, right. I mean, in Brooklyn. So, in the biggest court in the country, apparently. So, if you do the math, that comes out to, hundreds per month. So how could the judge listen to everybody? They can't. There's just not enough hours in the day.
It is true. It is true.
Yeah.
But I'll say even in Brooklyn Family Court and most family courts in New York State at this point, they also have a mediation program.
Yeah.
So that is an option for some people.
Yeah. So, one thing that I think is a very high conflict issue that comes up after people divorce is relocation.
Right.
Have you had a lot of experience with relocation cases, or
I have.
that you think would be interesting to our audience?
I think so. I have had several couples come to me who they've already been divorced, or couples who have created a custody agreement. They may be co-parents, maybe they've never been married, which is a common situation in Brooklyn, I would say.
Yeah.
But whether you're married or unmarried, it doesn't even matter. You're co-parents.
Right.
And
you're still parents.
You work hard for the benefit of your kids.
Yeah.
And so really many of the same issues. So if there's an agreement, then, we have to look at relocation in a particular way. And people come to me because they may have gotten a job offer. Let's say they're living in Brooklyn and the offer is out in California. They can't wait for a judge to decide the case in 2 years about whether the parent move with the child. I mean, obviously, the employer is going to move on to the next candidate. Like, you need to make a decision about what you want.
Yeah.
So what I always like to tell people, and this is something I've heard from judges, you can move wherever you want, but you can't necessarily move with the child. And that point has to be made. So the question is, what is going to happen with the relationship with the non-relocating parent? And the important thing is, how is that relationship going to be affected? So, and that's where we keep the children in mind. If you have a 3-year-old, they are going to be more flexible in some ways. But if you have a teenager who has a whole life here and their identity is based on their friends and their community, it's not going to be so easy for that child to move. And there may be a chance that they don't want to move.
Right. Especially, teenagers, because their focus developmentally is so much on their peers.
Exactly. So the question is, how can, as a family, we work together with a mediator to figure out what's not only best for the kids developmentally, emotionally, socially, how will they be able to maintain the relationship with the non-traveling parent? And so it is tough.
Yeah.
in terms of figuring out what that looks like for each family.
Right.
I had a
I mean, the
particular,
problem with relocation is that it feels like it's a zero-sum game. You know, you're either moving with the kids or you're moving without the kids or you're not moving, you know?
well, I've had two different situations where one situation, we, along the clients decided to do it on a trial basis for a year because the wife had many different careers. And so the ex-husband felt like, well, is this just a whim or is this like a real thing? So the husband agreed to allow the ex-wife and the child, who was in elementary school, to move to California for the year and to see how it goes, and that they would revisit. And unless they put something in writing and notarized, the schedule that was put in place for California was going to remain. And I did hear from them a year later. They wanted to let me know that they were continuing the schedule
Yeah.
and that the husband, ex-husband, didn't move to California, but he moved much closer. I forgot
Oh,
which state he moved to.
yeah. Yeah,
And
you
that's
know,
for them. So people, I always tell people, because it feels like so much pressure, like, what do I do? How do I decide things? You can just do something for a limited amount of time and
right.
see.
I mean, that's the benefit of mediation versus the court, is that
Right.
it's not like a court order that you can't change. You reached agreement and then you can go and talk about it, you know, and they can have an agreement to come back in a year and talk about it. And you know, I mean, as you're talking, I'm realizing I've had so many relocation cases, and like one problem that comes up is when a couple have been talking about possibly relocating. I had a couple I worked with where one of them was a successful screenwriter, and the had been talking to the spouse about moving to California, to LA, where their work was based, and then uh, you know, before they moved to California, that the screenwriter initiated the divorce mediation, and so the spouse changed their mind and said, I don't want to move." You know, so they ended up with an agreement where the screenwriter is actually commuting every week to LA, every
Wow.
Sunday, going to LA, staying till Thursday, coming back. This is like,
Yeah. But the schedule and all of our agreements talk about modification,
yeah,
right? So they do have an ability to modify it based on everybody's needs and most importantly, the kids' needs. So when a
yeah,
kid's younger and their school schedule is a little more liberal, it might be easier to travel. But once they get older, it's not so easy just to get on a plane to go to California. So
hmm,
some relocation cases provide the ability for the traveling parent um, to make accommodations and travel to visit the non-traveling parent with the child. It doesn't always
yeah,
have to be the other way around.
right, right.
So that's been helpful. Um,
And then, you know, talking about the exigency of the situation, I have a former client. I think they were divorced 7 or 8 years ago, and she just contacted me because she got a job offer in the town where her aging parents live, and you know, she's felt like she wanted to spend more time with her parents in these last years. I mean, you know, hopefully more than a few years, but um so she had to take she had to let them know, like, within you know, a week of when she called me um about the job. So the father consented um to the mother moving, But now they're going through very difficult negotiations because, he wants to pay less child support. He wants to like punish her. And because they didn't have time to work out all the details first, um, in some ways, like she doesn't have the leverage, to really negotiate more favorable terms because she's committed to doing this. And it's like turning into this high conflict situation. They actually mediated with someone else, and I was her consulting attorney,
Okay.
which was the subject you wanted to talk about as well, is
Yes.
the role of consulting attorneys in mediation. So I'm trying to help her negotiate now with her ex. And he actually has had, like, it's going to be possible for them to keep the same like number of days per year that he spent with the child, who's a teenager now. They're, the mother figured out a way to like structure the schedule in summers, like, the child's going to spend as much time in Brooklyn with dad as possible, and it's going to end up being the same number of days, but dad wants to lower child support because of the lower standard of living, and I don't know.
Yeah, well, that is such a common issue, the child support issue, and it's front and center of many of the relocations. So, as again, we're sitting here in Brooklyn, so you probably pick up the New York Times every day where it reminds us how this is like the most expensive place in the world to live.
Yeah.
But yes, if you do move, there is an argument that your monthly expenses have been lowered.
But
On
then
the
she's going to be making a third the salary that she makes here.
Well,
So
that's also a consideration. And then, of course, especially when we're talking about the East Coast, West Coast relocation, there's a lot of travel expenses that are incurred by the non-traveling parent many times.
right.
Or the traveling parent, like, sometimes we can talk about splitting the expenses. So one parent doesn't have to pay all the expenses, but sometimes one parent is burdened by the travel expenses. That is a factor in figuring out what the right amount of child support is, the
Right.
travel expenses that are involved.
Yeah.
So that's a point. And I've actually seen more recently, because New York is, not only is it so expensive, because many people's jobs are now hybrid or even remote, they don't
Right.
need to stay in the
They don't
city.
have to stay in the
So
city. Yeah.
it turns out the whole family ends up moving.
I've had like about 5 cases over the years where I had a couple that they both moved to Seattle. I had one, they both moved to Philadelphia.
Yes.
Twin Cities. I've had like a number of couples that have said, well, we're divorcing, but we're going to move together to a city that has a better, lower standard, lower cost of living.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's very interesting. I have, in fact, a couple I've been working with now, they relocated to Baltimore.
Yeah, it's, and even in New York City, people don't realize relocation is a very big issue. I also do some appellate work, and one of the appeals,
There's so many hats, Helene.
yeah, I like doing the full spectrum. I think I like to keep it interesting, and I think I'm more informed as a lawyer and a mediator because of that, because I really have a pulse on what's going on. So, anyway, this particular case, the couple had been living in Staten Island, and the mother moved to northern New Jersey. And the dad was really involved in like after school sports. Like, he was on a baseball team. And if you've had kids involved with sports, one of my kids was, you can really take over like the kid's life, the parents' life. It's like the whole
Yeah.
like mother, it's like a second job.
Right.
And so the court, Staten Island Family Court, denied the relocation because the dad wasn't going to be able to enjoy the sports
Oh,
schedule with the child. And since the child was moving to New Jersey, like, how is that supposed to,
yeah.
happen? And the appellate division affirmed, which means they agreed with the family court. But between like the case being decided in family court and the appeal, it was like over 2 years. So I don't know who that really benefited.
So
But
what did the kid, was the kid going to Staten Island after school to play sports? Or do you know what the kid did in the
early on in the situation, the kid did. And then as the time rolled out, the kid was just, in New Jersey, and the father didn't have the ability to leave his job, go to New Jersey, pick up the child. And of course, realistically, kids socialize with kids they go to school with. So it was going to become just more awkward.
Right.
But, the mother basically moved with the father giving permission.
Right. And got away with it. Yeah.
And pretty much got away with it. Exactly.
Right. I had
the father there.
I had
it was
some
called a Pyrrhic victory.
Right. Right. Yeah, I had some friends years ago who were having a very contentious divorce. Somebody I went to high school with, and she basically arranged to move to a suburb north of the city, in Westchester, and she like didn't tell anybody. She got the kids up like in the middle of the night and loaded them in the car and drove away, and the moving van came like in the middle of the night. So they just like left the house in Brooklyn. And then the judge, just sanctioned her $5,000 for doing that. And then the husband ended up moving to a neighboring town in Westchester anyway. So she didn't get away from him, which was her goal, Anyway, it was crazy.
It puts a lot of pressure on the kids.
Yeah.
It really does.
It does. And you can't, it sounds like you can't make everything perfect in life, in any life. I had a couple ones who said to me, can we protect our child from the divorce so that it doesn't impact him? And I said, no. Like there's always going to be a before and after for this kid. He was 8 years old. His parents are divorcing. His whole life is going to change. Is he going to be okay? That we can do. Can we protect him from conflict between the parents? Can we make him feel, that he's still loved by both his parents? Yes. There are things we can do to help him come through whole and healthy and functioning and not depressed. But can we, make it as if this never happened? No, we cannot.
Absolutely. And, like everybody, some kids do need therapy.
Yeah.
To help them with the transition.
And that's great if they can have that support. Someone who's neutral, so they don't feel like they have to choose their parents. They can really talk about how they're feeling.
I mean, in terms of parent support, sometimes I will recommend parent education. So it could be remote or in person. And they attend the class with other like-minded parents. It's confidential. I used to teach this class back in the day, and they hear from a litigator, they hear from a mediator, they hear from a mental health person, and it talks about what it means to co-parent, what it means when there's high conflict, how it affects the kids. There are some judges that actually will order that. But as mediators, we can recommend it. And what's the worst that can happen? Like you wasted 3 hours of your life. Most people walk out of there feeling validated.
Yeah.
They don't feel alone, and they feel supported. And I've never heard of a negative experience.
And maybe they'll meet someone to date. Maybe they can meet someone they want to date, because they're going through the same thing.
I haven't heard that. But I guess it could happen. People need to comfort each other.
Yes, that's right.
They need a support network.
Yeah, I've always thought that as a divorce mediator, I should have like a matchmaking business on the side.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm kidding, because There was one time I did match somebody with one of my friends, but
Oh, nice.
it was a collaborative case. I was his attorney, so I wasn't like leaving my neutrality. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'm of the mind, like, let's try to keep it as simple as possible. So even especially in mediations, if one parent is dating, I have like this rule. I mean, that if it's going well, that's great, but why don't you wait 6 months
Oh
before
yeah, before
introducing the kids, because
introducing
then
the
it
kids.
gets
Yeah,
so complicated and
yeah,
everybody's roles kind
yeah.
of get confusing.
Yeah, and if you think that it's going to be a serious relationship, you don't want the new person associated with the divorce. Like the kids will always think this third person caused it, whether they did or they didn't, if
Yeah.
it's too soon when they meet the person, I think.
I mean, most kids today, I mean, if they're being supported by the parents, this is just a fact of life that most relationships, at least 50% of them, are going to end in separation or divorce. And so if a child looks around the classroom, they're going to have friends in the same situation.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I mean, there are programs in some schools. I think
Yeah.
it's called the Banana Splits
Banana
program,
splits,
right?
right.
Where they meet maybe during lunchtime and everybody talks about what they're going through.
Yeah.
And it's had a lot of success.
Yeah. So, what are your thoughts about consulting and reviewing attorneys when people are in mediation? Do you require that couples who come to you for mediation have consulting attorneys, or what's your feeling about the role of a consulting attorney?
Well, I rarely place any rules on anything in mediation because it's their process. But I remind my clients that I am a neutral professional. My role is to provide legal information, but I'm not giving advice. That doesn't mean I can't help the couple come up with options, and they may, if they ask, what has been your experience with certain things? How have people managed it? But I always say I'm not giving you particular legal advice. So I would say probably less than half of my clients do seek consultation from a review attorney. So just to explain what that is, it's an attorney who has a more limited role in supporting the client. They're generally not sitting in the mediation. The client will contact their own lawyer. They create a retainer with that particular attorney. They can get advice. The attorney can help them prepare for the mediation. The attorney can review any agreements the mediator, if they're an attorney, puts together. So a lot of people know, because I have a lot of experience, they don't feel the need for the consulting attorney. But some people feel like, and I say it's like, you don't know what you don't know. So
Hmm.
some people don't really know what their rights are, or they don't know the the correct questions to ask in mediation. And even though I can help them in terms of, I give them lists and I explain the law to them, they really need the comfort of having a confidential relationship with their own attorney. So I guess I'll give you a lawyer's answer. It depends. If I feel like the clients are really going in the wrong direction, because I don't want to write up an agreement and I know a judge is going to toss it. I mean, that's not being transparent. And
Right.
I want to support them get through this as painlessly as possible.
Yeah.
I'm going to recommend that they have a consulting attorney. Um, and sometimes, like, you have to talk about why somebody doesn't want a consulting attorney, even though I think it might be necessary. It
Hmm.
might be a financial reason.
Yeah.
And we can talk about options on, like, well, maybe the other spouse or co-parent can like front the money and they can pay them back in the settlement at the end of the case. Like, there's ways of managing that. But if somebody really needs the attorney and they're financially, there's a financial constraint, then we need to really talk about that, because you want these agreements to be durable for the long term, and you don't
Right.
want people to say, well, I was pressured into this because I didn't have a consulting attorney.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
didn't
not what you
understand what I
want.
was signing. Right. Right.
Right.
You
Because
don't want them
most
to.
people are just, this is such a traumatic experience for people.
Yeah.
And many of our clients, I'm sure you've had the same thing. They come in like, we just want this done,
Yeah.
and
They do.
sometimes,
They're in pain, and they think maybe when this is done, I'll feel better.
right. So you need
Yeah.
to try to slow it down for them a little bit.
Yeah.
And
And get it right. Like they say, don't rush to the wrong finish line.
exactly. And that consulting attorney, maybe they just need to see them once or twice. It doesn't have
Yeah.
to be a whole long-term
Right.
relationship, just to give them the support and the confidence that they
Right.
know they're making the right choices.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I've really discovered over the years that people don't always read the agreement. And I get these
Don't.
calls. I got an email this morning from a man who they signed their agreement like last September. And he was calling to ask me, what does it say about this? What am I supposed to do about this division of extracurricular activities, the cost of extracurriculars, And
Yeah.
I, of course, immediately go to the agreement that they signed. And I said, well, on page 12, it says blah, blah, blah. But people don't read the agreements, and I mean, if they're not lawyers, I can't really fault them, because it's dense stuff to read. So, we're in the habit of reading it all the time, but they're not.
Yeah, and it just reminds me, my mediations are around 2 hours, and I prepare a summary so everybody can reflect and process what everybody said, what the next steps are. And I often use those summaries to help build an agreement.
Yeah,
And I always say, please read these summaries before the next session.
yeah,
And I have a secure portal that I manage, so I know who goes in
oh,
and reads these
you can see
summaries
it.
and
Oh,
who
that's
does it,
funny.
and half of them don't read it.
Yeah, wow,
And
that's
it's
interesting.
amazing to me that they'll walk in and not really process what we discussed.
Yeah, so you
So,
have to go back through it with them in person to get
exactly.
them to focus on it. Yeah.
Right.
Well, Helene, I'm afraid we're running out of time, but it's just been a pleasure talking to you this morning. And you
It's
have
fun.
just a
Thanks.
wealth of experience and knowledge to bring to your clients. And I'm sure that they are grateful for that. And I'm grateful for you sharing that wealth of information and knowledge with the audience of Keep Your Kids in Mind.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I've always loved working with you, and you've been such a mentor to me, and you've been a gift to the mediation community. Thank
Oh,
you.
you're so sweet. Thank you. I enjoy talking to you all the time too. Hope to see you
Okay.
soon.